We're excited for you to get started with your creation of your Fidesic AP account for GP. If you haven't already created your account, you can just head to Fidesic.com and click on sign up, and that will take you to a registration page. The first thing we're going to need is your company name, and this should be your official company name exactly as it appears on your checks. You'll also need to enter your first name, last name, and an email address to go along with the account. You also need to select your accounting package, so make sure to select Dynamics GP here. And for product type, we're going to go with accounts payable, agree to the terms, and click register. Once we've clicked that register button, it's going to send an email confirmation to you. After you've received your sign up email, you'll simply have to enter a password to create your account. Now that your account's created, we can walk you through the initial setup steps. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is go to your settings panel up here, which is going to have a lot of valuable things for you, and go to your company settings option. You'll want to edit this page to enter your address, phone number, and make sure that your accounting package has been selected properly. You'll also have the option to upload your own custom logo here. This would be displayed on any vendor account center that is set up for your account. Next, we're going to want to go to Company Preferences. On Company Preferences, this is where we can select the various configuration options within Fidesic. Auto-generate vendor numbers and auto-sign-up vendors is not something that's going to be common for GP users. If you need more info on that, contact support. If you want your vendors to only be able to view their payments, then you can click this preference, which is Payments Only Vendor Account Center. This will show GLs in more locations, have the ability for your vendors to enter comments. One of the most important preferences that you might want to enable is the Use GL Location/Markets. This is going to add a whole host of features to Fidesic as it relates to locations or certain market segments. We'll have more on that later. If you're using multi-entity management or using a company that has GL-specific users, this is probably something that you're going to want to enable. This preference will allow you to download unapproved invoices into GP, not commonly enabled. This preference will only let you pay approved invoices within our system. We do have a confirmation process that's set up at the end of OCR, but not too many users use it. Other important preferences on this page are have Fidesic print and mail approved checks. When you enable this preference, we will print and mail your checks for you. This means that you will no longer be the party in charge of printing and mailing. So make sure that you're ready to enable that preference. And then here is approver signature on check. Within our system, there's two different configurations. You can either have the approval signature be put on a check at a company-wide level, or you can have the actual approver's signatures placed on the check. So we'll enable that for now. Now that we've got the base settings configured, we're going to want to add some users. First thing we want to check out under the settings menu here is to manage roles. And this is going to show you the different roles that are already set up within the system. The common ones that we'll set up are accounts payable clerk, accounts payable manager, entry, and an invoice and payment approver. Each one of these roles is going to have unique permissions assigned to them, which you can see here. And if you want more detail or to adjust what permissions are assigned to each individual role, you can click the edit button and then control each individual permission that is assigned to each individual role. Now, if we go to the Manage Users page here, we'll be able to see what permissions are assigned to each user. So we'll see here that my login that I created, not only is it an admin, it's an account owner, and it has the role assigned of accounts payable manager. So if you want to add somebody else at your staff, you can go to Add User up here, enter that user's email address, and then select the role that you would like them associated with. So if this is an invoice approver type role, we can select that, save it, and they have now been added as a user. We're going to send a sign up email out to that user, but if it gets flagged or not received for whatever reason, you do have the option to resend that sign up email just by clicking that button here. You'll also have the ability to add or remove roles to existing users after they've already been created. You'll also see that we have locations assigned. That ties back to the locations permission that I enabled on the company level, and we'll have the ability to add individual locations or certain GL segments to users. That's going to limit their view in terms of what they can see within the system. They'll only be able to see invoices that relate to their locations or markets that are assigned on a user-by-user basis. To start processing invoices within Fidesic, first you're going to want to sync your vendor lists and chart of accounts with our system. There will be a detailed link in the description about how to set up our vendor sync system and how to install our module into GP directly. But assuming that you've already taken care of those steps, to submit invoices into our system and begin processing, you're going to go to Invoice Inbox. This Invoice Inbox page is the place where you can set up and configure how invoices are going to be received within the system. You'll have the ability to set up a custom email address for invoice submission, and this will be likely you can enter your company name here, but this is an email of your choosing. Once you've set this up, we'll create 2 email addresses on your behalf. There's the first one that you created at ap.fidesic.com, and anything submitted to this address is going to queue up on this page for entry. The second address is going to be the at ocr.fidesic.com email address, and anything submitted to that is going to be processed automatically. So you won't have to do any entry on invoices submitted to this OCR setup. If you have locations enabled, we do support location-based capture as well. And basically, it's just going to be the location code added on to the prefix of the email, and anything sent to these location-specific email addresses is going to be coded to that specific location when it's sent in for processing. So these are the 2 primary ways to get invoices into Fidesic directly, but you also have the option for a manual upload. So you can drag and drop files onto this page, or you can go to a choose file and grab any PDF that you have on hand for entry. So I've uploaded an example PDF here. It'll show you who uploaded it and when it was uploaded, and you'll have the option to create this invoice, view the attachment, move it into your company queue, or remove this attachment. So if you just click on the PDF here, you'll be taken to an entry page where you can enter the basic information on the invoice directly. And like I mentioned, anything that is sent to this address is going to queue up on this page. Anything that's submitted by you is going to show up in what we call my queue, and everything is going to show up on the company queue. So you have the option to make this queue private or public based on what you'd like your preferences to be, but everything submitted is going to show up in the company queue, and you'll have the option to move it into your queue for direct processing. To process payments using Fidesic, you'll also need to set up banking information. So if you go, again, to your preferences up here, or your settings, and then go to banking, you'll be taken to a page where you can add a bank account directly to Fidesic. To process out of GP, this bank account is going to need to match exactly what you have within GP. So the account nickname is going to be the bank ID as it is on the bank maintenance card in GP. The name on the account will be the company name that you have set on the account in GP. Routing is going to be listed as the transit number within GP, and account number is your bank account number. You do have the option to add multiple bank accounts here, and you can set your defaults after you add it. But again, to process properly, this information is going to need to match exactly what you have on the checkbook ID within GP. If you have locations enabled, we're going to need you to also configure those locations within the system. So to do that, you're going to go to your company settings and then go ahead and click the locations tab at the top here. This locations tab is where you can add or upload locations directly into the system, and these can be used for both invoice routing as well as user-based permissions. So to add locations individually, you can simply click this add button, and you'll need to pick the location code, which is the actual code that is in the GL segment here. We'll say example 100. It'll need a name, and then a segment this is associated with. So this will be based on your GLs that we've synced from GP. You'll be able to select what GL segment this individual code relates to. So while this is labeled location, you can use this feature and function for department or anything else that is associated with a GL segment. So if I go ahead and click save on this, I've now added a specific location code to our locations list. Obviously, if you have a big list of these locations, you'll probably want to do these in a batch upload, and you have the option to do so if you click here. And then you'll be able to import a list of all of your locations. This is also encouraged to use this page if you have addresses associated with each location. So to use this uploader, just create a spreadsheet with these headers and then populate it with information, and you'll be able to upload it directly. And then from there, that'll automatically create all of the locations on this list here. Once we have those locations enabled, you can assign these locations to individual users. So if I go to a user and say that this user needs to be only able to see the home office, you can select that home office as a location here, and those that user will only be able to see invoices as they relate to that particular location that is assigned to them. If you want a user to be able to see all locations, you can simply remove any specific location assignment, and this user will have access to all locations. Also, under company settings is your chart of accounts tab. Now, if you've set up vendor sync or the module already, you can sync the actual codes with our system. If you like to upload them, you do have that as an option, but as a Dynamics GP user, I would strongly encourage you to just install the module or the vendor sync module and run that sync to get the codes loaded in automatically. Whether or not you have the codes loaded in, we'll just have the list of codes. We're going to want you to go ahead and add individual segments to the system. So to do so, all we're going to do is click on the segments right here, and then this is going to become editable. And then we're going to pick how many segments we have and then give each of these segments a name. Once we save this, we've got our individual segments now have names, and we know that there's 5 segments. Again, the actual codes will be synced from GP, but you have the option to name or modify the name of each individual segment. Now that you've got the base level information set up, you'll likely want to set up a workflow for either invoice or payment approval. To do so, we're going to head back to our settings menu and go to the workflow page. On this workflow page, you'll have both an invoice workflow and a payment workflow, and these workflows are entirely separate. So on this invoice workflow tab, first off, we can set up a default approver. So if you just click this not set, you'll be able to set this to an individual user. And then whatever workflow or lack of workflow is set up here, things will be routed to this user no matter what. The same setup works for the payment approval workflow. You can set the same or a different user as the default approver for everything that isn't routed separately on this page. So to add a stage to the workflow, we'll click the Add a Stage button. Then we'll be able to select from all of the available options on what type of stage we want. Common rules would be amount, the vendor that it's from. So vendor account is the name. I would highly recommend using vendor number, which is the vendor ID within GP, just make sure that we're matching properly. And then all of the location segments that were configured earlier. So let's pick a rule based on location, as that's going to be a common way to do it. And we're going to create this after the start stage. So now we see we have one stage within the system. So if we want to add a new rule to this, we're going to click the add button, and where you click the add button is going to be important, but right now we only have one option. So we'll click start right here. This is going to be a rule added to stage 1. If the location is equal to location 100, then we're going to want to approve this by this particular user. So great. We've got our rule now. We have one stage. Any invoices that are for location 100 are going to be sent to this particular user. So if we want to have a rule alongside this, you can add another rule here. So let's say location 200, and that's going to be approved by our approver. So now we've got two rules. If it's location 100, it's going to go to this particular user. If it's location 200, it's going to go to this particular user. If neither of these are true, we've always got our default approver that we set previously down here that'll be notified about this. And if you want to put in a specific exception, you do have the option to do that as well on a stage by stage basis. So to add an exception rule that will trigger if neither of these triggers, again, hit the plus sign, pick our stage, and if we select unhandled, that essentially means none of the other rules in this stage were triggered, so send it here. So we can add that to a different user, and then if it's 100, it'll go here. If it's 200, it'll go here. And if it's anything else, it's going to go to this user for approval. So that's a simplistic one-stage style approval workflow. Another common way to do this is then to have like your AP staff approve everything at the end, or have certain approvals that will depend on the dollar amount cut off. So if we want to add a stage based on amount here, we're going to want to add that after our first stage. Now we'll have the option to add additional rules onto this. So if it's from location 100, and so again, to add a rule here, you'll go to options, add rule. We'll say it is greater than or equal to $1,000. And we're also going to require an approval from this particular user. Because I added this rule from the previous rule, then this rule is tied directly to the previous rule as denoted by the little connector here. If we want this rule to apply to all invoices independent of what happens in the previous stage, you can add a stage 2 rule directly from the start. So if I want to add a stage 2 rule that everything over 0, so aka every invoice, is going to need to be approved by, let's say, this particular user, we can see that this now looks different. This rule is independent of this first stage entirely. So in this example, anything that is sent through the system and is over $0 is going to require this user's approval. It could hit these rules, it could not. Either way, it's going to be sent here for approval. Versus this rule, which was added in on top of this initial rule here, is only going to be triggered if the previous rule happens. So if it's not GL segment 100, this rule is not going to happen. But this rule, since it was added from the start, separate from these other previous rules, is always going to be triggered whether or not whatever happens in stage 1. So that's a brief overview of how to use the workflow. Contact support. We're happy to help out and get this configured initially. Great thing is, once it's set up, you can edit these rules directly. But you do have the option to create it from scratch if you'd like as well. And the payment workflow works exactly the same. It's just a completely separate workflow. So keep that in mind. They don't have to be related at all. And you can build out your workflow as much as you need. So that wraps it up for the basic setup of the system. Again, you'll also want to install the modules. So instructions on how to do that will be linked in the description below, and that will actually sync the vendors and chart of accounts. So you'll have your real accounting data loaded in, as well as give you the ability to import, which will also be linked below. And as always, if you have any questions or need help, you can contact our support department. You'll always have access to support directly from the live chat down here. And if you just are looking for a guide that isn't listed below, under the help menu, you can go to the knowledge base. And this knowledge base is searchable and sortable and should have lots of guides that will help you out through the setup and configuration process. So hope this was helpful, and feel free, contact support if you need more assistance. Thanks.